The day my mother took her last breath, my brother was 3 states away, closing on a vacation home. I didn't find that out until later. At the time, I was sitting in the chair next to her hospital bed, holding her hand, watching the monitor, listening to the sound that I will never be able to unhear. The nurses were kind. They dimmed the lights. One of them put a hand on my shoulder and said, "She wasn't alone." And I nodded, because I didn't have the words for what I actually felt, which was, she wasn't alone because I made sure of it. I was there every single day for 7 months. My brother hadn't visited once. His name doesn't matter. I'll just call him what he was, absent. I'm 31. I work as a home health aide, which is almost funny now when I think about it. I take care of other people's parents for a living, and for 7 months I took care of my own mother for free without a second thought, because she was my mom and she was sick, and there was no one else. My brother lived in Phoenix. He had a good job, a nice house, a wife who always seemed to be in the middle of something important whenever I called. He had money. What he didn't have was time for our mother. She was diagnosed in February, stage 3 ovarian cancer. The oncologist was careful with his words, but I understood what he was really saying. This was serious, this was a fight, and she would need help. I drove her to every appointment. I reorganized my work schedule to part-time. I moved my things into her second bedroom in March, and I didn't leave until she died in September. 7 months. I kept a notebook on the kitchen counter where I logged everything. Every medication. Every dosage. Every time she ate, what she ate, how much. Doctor's appointments, home nurse visits, prescription pickups. I still have that notebook. It has coffee rings on the cover and my handwriting gets sloppier as the months go on, which I think says something true about how exhausted I was. My brother called about once every 3 weeks, sometimes less. The conversations were short. He'd ask how she was doing. I'd tell him. He'd say he was going to try to get out there soon. He never did. In June, I sent him a message asking if he could come, even for a week, just so I could sleep without one ear open. He said work was crazy. He said he'd see what he could do. He sent a fruit basket 2 weeks later, one of those ones with the cellophane and the ribbon that costs $40 and takes 30 seconds to order online. I didn't respond to that. My mother knew. She didn't say much about it because she never liked conflict. But sometimes she'd look at me with this expression that I think was part gratitude and part grief. Not grief about dying, but grief about what she was seeing. Her daughter sleeping on a twin mattress in the next room. Her son sending fruit baskets from Phoenix. Near the end, when she could still talk clearly, she told me she was going to make sure I was taken care of. She said, "You stayed. That means something." I told her she didn't need to worry about any of that. She said she wanted to. I let it go because she was tired and I didn't want to spend whatever time we had left talking about money. I should have paid more attention to that conversation. She died on a Thursday morning in September. It was early, just past 6. The light was doing that thin gray thing it does before the sun actually comes up. I had fallen asleep in the chair next to her bed around 2 and woke up to the change in the sound of her breathing. By the time the hospice nurse arrived, she was already gone. I called my brother from the hospital parking lot. He picked up on the second ring, which surprised me. I told him. There was silence and then he said, okay, like he was processing a work problem. Then he said he'd start looking at flights. He and his wife arrived 2 days later. They stayed at a hotel downtown. I didn't ask why they didn't stay at my mother's house. There was plenty of room, but I noticed it. They came by the house that first evening and his wife walked through every room in a way that I can only describe as assessing. She ran her hand along the kitchen counter. She opened the back door and looked at the yard. My brother stood in the living room with his hands in his pockets, looking at the family photos on the wall like he was in a museum. The funeral was small. My mother had been specific about that. No big service. Graveside only. Close family, and a few friends. I organized everything. I chose the flowers. I wrote the obituary. I stood at that graveside in the September wind and held it together because I had been holding it together for 7 months and I didn't know how to stop. My brother cried at the grave. I watched him out of the corner of my eye and I felt something complicated. Not quite anger, not quite pity. Something in between. 3 days after the funeral, he asked me to meet him at the house. He said there were things we needed to discuss. I said fine. I drove over that afternoon and found him and his wife sitting at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad in front of them. It had bullet points on it. I could see that from across the room. He started by saying he knew this had been hard on me. He said he was grateful for everything I'd done. His wife nodded along. Then he slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a printout from a real estate website, my mother's house already listed, or rather, a valuation estimate. He'd had someone come look at the property while I was handling the funeral arrangements. Without telling me, the house is worth around $480, he said, maybe more depending on the market. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at him. I figured we'd sell, he said. Split it down the middle, that's the fair thing. I said, did Mom talk to you about her will? He shifted in his seat. I know she had one. We'll deal with that through the estate. I said, she told me she wanted to make sure I was taken care of. His wife said, gently like she was explaining something to a child, your brother has expenses too. The house is a shared asset. I didn't say anything for a moment. I looked at the legal pad. I could see one of the bullet points from where I was sitting. It said moving costs. What moving costs? I said. He said they'd been thinking about their situation. Phoenix was getting expensive. His wife's company had remote options now. The house had good bones. With a little work, it could really be something. It took me a full 5 seconds to understand what he was saying. You want to move in, I said. We'd buy out your half, he said quickly, at fair market value. You'd get your share. His wife added that they'd already looked at comparable sales in the neighborhood. I stood up. I picked up my jacket. I said, I'll need to look at the will before we talk about any of this. And I left. I sat in my car in my mother's driveway for 15 minutes before I could drive. My hands were on the steering wheel and I was staring at the garage door, which still had the dent in it from when my mother backed into it in 2019. And we laughed so hard we had to sit down on the driveway. Then I drove to my mother's attorney's office. Her name was on the directory. I hadn't made an appointment, but I walked in and told the receptionist I needed to speak with someone about my mother's estate. She'd passed 4 days ago. The receptionist looked at my face and made a call. I met with an associate that afternoon. He pulled up my mother's file while I sat across from him. He was young, maybe late 20s, and he was careful and professional, and I appreciated that he didn't make me feel like I was making a scene. He read through the will. Then he looked up. Your mother updated this in July, he said. I didn't know that. He walked me through it. She had left the house to me, entirely, not split to me. She'd also left me her savings account, which had about $42,000 in it from years of careful, quiet saving. My brother received her car and some personal items she had specified by name. It was not an equal split. It was not meant to be. There was a letter attached. The attorney read it to me because I asked him to, because I didn't trust myself to read it out loud. It was short. She said she knew what she was doing. She said she thought about it carefully. She said that staying was worth more than money and that she wanted me to have a place to stand. I drove back to the house. My brother and his wife were still there. They'd made coffee. I sat down at the kitchen table across from my brother, and I told him what the will said. His face went through several things very quickly. First disbelief, then something darker. That's not right, he said. I said, she updated it in July. That's 4 months after the diagnosis. She was clear-headed. The attorney confirmed it. His wife said, she probably felt pressured. She was sick. She was stressed. I said, she was not pressured. She was lucid and she made a decision. My brother's voice got tight. He said he was going to contest it. He said he had rights as an heir. He said I had clearly influenced her and that it wasn't legal. He said a lot of things, his voice getting louder each time, and I sat there very still and let him say them because I had the notebook on my kitchen counter with 7 months of documentation in it. Because I had every pharmacy receipt and every appointment record and every note from the home health nurse who came twice a week. Because my mother had an attorney who had watched her sign that document and witnessed her state of mind. When he finished, I said, "You can talk to an estate attorney, that's your right. But I want you to understand what a contest means. It means discovery, it means records, it means 7 months of documentation gets entered into the record, including the fact that you visited 0 times and sent a fruit basket in June." Silence. His wife said something quietly. He put his hand up and she stopped. "I would have come," he said, "if it had gotten really serious." "She had a PICC line in for 4 months," I said. "She lost 40 pounds. She couldn't drive. I slept in the next room for 7 months. What did you think serious looked like?" He didn't answer that. They left an hour later. His wife didn't look at me when they walked out. My brother stopped at the door, and I thought he was going to say something that mattered, something real, something that acknowledged what had actually happened over the past 7 months. Instead, he said, "This isn't over." I closed the door. I stood in my mother's hallway, which smelled like her hand lotion and a little like the lavender candle I'd been burning in the evenings, and I let myself breathe for the first time in what felt like days. 2 weeks later, his attorney sent a letter. They were formally contesting the will on grounds of undue influence. I forwarded it to my mother's attorney and handed over the notebook and every document I had, which turned out to be 3 inches of paper in a manila folder. Medical records, prescription logs, home nurse visit summaries, my own contemporaneous notes with dates and times, a printout of every text thread showing when I'd asked my brother to come and what he'd said. The home health nurse wrote a statement. She'd worked with my mother every Tuesday and Thursday for 5 months. She wrote that my mother was consistently oriented, consistently communicative, consistently clear about her wishes. She wrote that my mother talked about me often. She wrote that in all her years of doing this work, she'd rarely seen anyone care for a parent the way I had. I didn't know about the statement until my attorney shared it with me. I read it at my kitchen table and I had to put it down twice before I could finish it. The contest was dropped 6 weeks after it was filed. My brother's attorney sent a 1-line letter confirming withdrawal. No explanation, no call, nothing else from my brother directly for 2 months. I know what you're thinking. And yes, it hurt. It still does, in a way that's hard to explain. Because the grief about my mother and the grief about my brother are tangled together in a way I'm not sure ever fully separates. I lost her, and then I lost whatever idea I'd been holding on to about him, which maybe I should have let go a long time ago. But here's what I know now that I didn't know sitting in that hospital parking lot in September. I know my mother saw me clearly. I know she thought about what she was doing and she did it with intention. I know that the notebook on the counter wasn't just a medical log. It was a record of what love actually looks like when it's not convenient, when it's not comfortable, when it costs you something real. I still live in the house. I painted the kitchen in November, the yellow she always wanted but never got around to. I kept her hand lotion on the bathroom shelf for longer than I probably should have. I planted things in the backyard in spring, tomatoes because she loved them, and some herbs along the fence. I set up a small fund in her name through a local organization that provides support for family caregivers. People like me who are doing this alone, without backup, without relief, without a fruit basket from someone 3 states away who means well but doesn't show up. The fund is small right now, but it's real, and it has her name on it. And when I think about what she said, I want you to have a place to stand. I think this is what she meant. Not just the house. This. My brother texted me in December. It was brief. He said he'd been thinking. He said he hoped we could talk sometime. I read it twice and then I set my phone face down and I went back to what I was doing. Some doors, once you understand what's on the other side, you stop trying to open. I didn't lose my brother, I just finally saw him accurately. And I chose, very quietly, very clearly, to stop carrying something that was never mine to carry in the first place. My mother knew that before I did. She always was the smarter one. I used to think showing up was the bare minimum. After everything, I've come to believe it's actually everything. There's a version of this story where I did nothing. where I kept working full-time, visited on weekends when I could, sent money instead of time. No one would have blamed me. People do that all the time and call it reasonable. But I couldn't do it, not because I'm a saint, I'm not, but because when I looked at my mother in that hospital bed in February, I understood something I couldn't unfeel. This was the moment, and moments like this don't come back. What I didn't understand then was that making that choice would also require me to be smart about it. Loving someone deeply doesn't protect you from people who mistake your softness for weakness. My brother saw my devotion and calculated an opportunity. He walked into that house with a legal pad and bullet points because he assumed grief had made me manageable. It almost worked. Almost. What stopped him wasn't anger. I didn't have the energy for anger anymore. What stopped him was documentation. 7 months of dates and times and dosages and notes, kept not because I anticipated a fight, but because good care requires precision. My mother's attorney had a file. The home health nurse had memories she was willing to put in writing. The truth, when it's lived carefully and honestly, leaves a record. That's something I keep coming back to. The notebook on the counter wasn't strategy, it was just how I did the work. But it turned out that doing the work with integrity, actually doing it thoroughly without shortcuts, meant that when someone tried to rewrite what had happened, the real version was still there. Documented, dated, witnessed. Doing right by someone, it turns out, is its own kind of protection. And then there's the harder part, the part about my brother. I've spent time being angry, and I've spent time being sad, and I've landed somewhere quieter than either of those. He made his choices over 7 months. Every unreturned visit, every short phone call, every week that passed, those were choices. Not crises, not impossibilities, choices. And I think he believed that the choosing wouldn't cost him anything, that love was something you could defer indefinitely and reclaim whenever it became convenient. My mother understood that it doesn't work that way. She had 7 months to watch both of us, and she made her decision with clear eyes. I think about the letter her attorney read to me. Staying is worth more than money. I want you to have a place to stand. She wasn't punishing him. She was just being accurate. She saw what had been given, and she named it. There's a kind of quiet courage in that, deciding to tell the truth about what things cost, even at the end, even when it would have been easier to split everything down the middle and let everyone pretend. I planted tomatoes in her backyard this spring. I painted the kitchen the yellow she always wanted. The house feels like hers still, which I thought would be painful and turns out to be a comfort. Her name is on the small caregiver fund now. Not famous, not large, just real. I'm 31. I've learned that love is a verb that requires your actual presence, that integrity isn't just a value you hold, it's a practice you keep, day after day, even when no one is watching, especially when no one is watching, and that the strength to keep going when you're exhausted and alone and nobody is coming to help, that's not something anyone gives you. You find it because the person in front of you needs you to. My mother saw all of that in me before I saw it in myself. I think that's the most important thing she left me,